This is still Saturday, the 30th of November, a day after the killings that happened yesterday at the north end of London Bridge, actually in Fishmonger's Hall. Looks like the killings were done there in Fishmonger's Hall, not out on the bridge, except for Usman Khan himself. And I said that I'd do a second video on this. The first video is already up on YouTube, and we're getting an awful lot of people who are watching it and commenting on it. And that was concerning the fake vest that Usman Khan was wearing. Now, the second video that I promised I would give concerns more what we're now hearing about Usman Khan and what we're now hearing about not only all that led up to these killings, but also some of the real failings of the whole criminology system there in Britain, and I'm sure the same would be the case here in the United States as well. But before we do that, I have a set of questions that I would like to bring out, and I hope people can answer them. I hope there's going to be a good discussion at the bottom of this video in the comment section, because we do need to ask these questions, and we need to ask questions concerning where we're at in the West with Islam. So to lead up to these questions, let's just go and rehash and relook at what we now know about this man, is Usman Khan. We do know that he grew up in Stoke-on-Trent, that he was a British citizen from a Pakistani family, Kashmiri Pakistani family. He grew up in a very religious household. He did not grow up with an awful lot of other Pakistanis, and from what we're understanding and what we're hearing about many of those who grew up with him, he went to a mainly English school. So he had a very English education. He was a minority in that school. And then he seemed to have become a friend of Anjem Choudary, who I know well. In fact, I've debated Anjem Choudary a number of times. We have had contact, he and I, together, and I have also debated his teacher, Sheikh Omar Bakri Muhammad. So I know Anjem Choudary very well, and those of you who have been following the UK scene will know that Anjem Choudary was and still is the leader of what had been the Mahajirun Party, which became the 1924 Committee, which is known as the Current Affairs Society. It has been changed. It has changed its name. The only reason you know it's the same party because it keeps the same phone number. And Anjem Choudary himself has been in prison and now has been released. And he is one of these who is on this Desistance and Disengagement Program, the DDP program himself. 116 of them are now in this DDP program. And it was he that I want to talk about, not he, but it was because of him that Usman Khan became active, became very radical, and became radicalized. Then in 2010, he was caught along with these men. And these men I'm going to picture up here. These are a cell of 9 men. He was one of them. You can see his picture there. And here's a picture of them out on a park from a surveillance camera. The circle is here is Usman Khan. They had been caught as a cell, an Al-Qaeda cell. In fact, they were about ready to put bombs in the toilets of the stock exchange, and they also had plans to put up bombs in the U.S. Embassy there in London, and also in the home of Boris Johnson. This is way back in 2010, who would have been the mayor at that time. They had also were planning to put bombs into 2 synagogues and also St. Paul's Cathedral. So you can see they were, from what the reports are saying, they were also intending to put bombs in pubs and also drinking places. So they were planning to destroy Boris Johnson, the mayor. They wanted to destroy synagogues, Jews, and they wanted to destroy Christians, St. Paul's Cathedral. So obviously he was then put in prison, and he was imprisoned in 2012. And he was put in prison with the intention of him staying in prison because he was considered to be a risk to the public. But he wrote a letter, and from what we're understanding now, and here is the letter right here, and I've got it in front of me. This is the letter he wrote, and there's his name, Mr. Usman Khan, and that's his penmanship. And it's fascinating. It was this letter that actually led to him joining the DDP, which is the Desistance and Disengagement Program, which I want to talk about in just a bit. But according to this letter, he says, as you're fully aware, it doesn't say who, they've blotted out who this is to, but it was received on October the 15th, 2012. He was in Belmarsh prison when he wrote it. As you are fully aware of my offense, which is a terrorism offense, it relates more to what I intended and the mindset at that time. Also, the I can't read the next word. The something I carried out, probably the action I carried out, which I realize now after spending some time to think were not according to Islam and its teaching. So here he's admitting that what he did was not according to Islam. This is what he's writing in his letter in 2012. I would be grateful if you would arrange some kind of course that I can do where I can properly learn Islam and its teachings. And I can prove I don't carry the extreme views which I might have carried it before. I've been informed that there are courses like this, like the de-radicalization, a course which is approved by the Home Office. I would like to do such a course so I can prove to the authorities and my family and society in general that I don't carry the view I had before. So he's saying this way back in 2012 that he doesn't carry these views of radicalization or of violence. And before my arrest, and I also can prove that at the time I was immature. So the reason he carried these views, he was immature. And now I am much more mature and want to live my life as a good Muslim and also a good citizen of Britain. So could you arrange, he says, that I attend this course? Now this was done way back in 2012. He therefore must have been taking that course while he was in prison, and then was seen for good measure, because he was a good prisoner. He was then able to be released early after only 8 years. He was supposed to be a 16-year sentence. He got half the sentence because he was a good model prisoner and he had written this letter. And so they then tagged him, and they put a tag on his ankle so they could follow him at all times. Now, here a year later, so he comes out of prison in December of 2018. We're now into November, at the end of last day of November in 2019, almost entirely a year later, and he has been part of this Desistance and Disengagement Program, which has 116 people in it, including Anjem Choudhury as well. They're all part of this program to de-radicalize these Muslims. And the question we want to ask is this program working? And my answer is, obviously, it's not working. Because if you can write a letter like this and be then put into this program, specifically saying, I am now reformed, I no longer believe what I did believe, but then you do what he did yesterday, showing to me that you can pretty well say anything you want, and the government, or in this case the criminologists, will believe you. What's more, he was invited to go to this meeting there at the Fishmongers Hall yesterday, Friday, and the man I'm going to put up here, this is the picture, this is the man that was killed. There were two people killed, a woman and a man. They haven't given the name of the woman, but this is the man that was killed. His name is Jack Meritt, and he had got his doctorate. I understand. There's been a confusion here. In one case, I heard it was from Oxford. Now it was from Cambridge. Nonetheless, he was part of this group from Cambridge University that put on this program. And here's a picture of them in the hall. This is before the killings, from what the Daily Mail is saying. So you can see they brought these prisoners together with staff from Cambridge University and students, sponsored by Cambridge University. Jack Meritt was the coordinator for this program, and so he must have invited Usman Khan to this meeting with the intention of him getting up there and claiming what has gone right in his life, and he was going to be a model example of learning together. That's the program that he was sponsoring, but he had gone through this program called the Disengagement and Desistance Program. Something awfully went wrong, obviously. What's fascinating to me is, why is it that he was able to even get into that room, and what in the world are they choosing that Fishmongers Hall as a place for this kind of meeting that included Muslim terrorists or ex-Muslim terrorists, when this is right next to the very bridge where a similar thing happened 2 years ago. Now, I'm trying to put us all together, but stop and think. Just take a look at those two incidents. What happened in June of 2017, where three men started at Borough Market and then they killed 8 people, stabbing them with knives, just like what Usman Khan did. They also had suicide vests, fake suicide vests, not real suicide vests, like Usman Khan. They also were killed by police because they had fake suicide vests, like Usman Khan. Can you see the parallels here? And why, knowing that this had happened right at that bridge, why in the world do they even choose that place called Fishmonger's Hall to have this kind of meeting and to bring ex or former, supposedly reformed jihadis? I don't think the irony was lost on Usman Khan. I think he intentionally went there. Obviously, he was able to get into that room without being spotted, without having to open up his jacket, and certainly he got a knife. Maybe he didn't bring the knife with him. It could be it was from the kitchen. We don't know, because we do know that he burst out of the kitchen. He was downstairs when he started attacking, and the first person he attacked was the coordinator, unfortunately Jack Meritt, the very man who thought he had been reformed. Killed him. Killed another woman near the entrance, we understand, and wounded 3 others. As he went outside, there were others that followed him. In fact, one of them was one of the workers, a kitchen worker, who grabbed this narwhal sword, the narwhal whale, the pointed the horn that's at the narwhal. He grabbed one of these, was on the wall, and ran out after him. And another man grabbed a fire extinguisher, and between the two of them, they were able to stop him on the bridge. They were able. You can see these pictures. They're firing this fire extinguisher at him, and the narwhal, the guy, he's a Polish worker, I understand, who was working in the kitchen, was able to hold him down, while some others, 3 or 4 others, then came from across the street, other civilians, and they wrestled him to the ground, including one who had been I understand one of them who had wrestled him to the ground was also a former inmate at prison who was at this same meeting. They held him on the ground there, holding, in fact, stepping on his head and stepping on his hand until the police came and being able to dislodge the knife from his hand, and were able then to keep him from hurting anybody else. Meanwhile, the man that had the narwhal was actually stabbed in the hand, and I understand he's wounded. He's been wounded slightly, nothing really serious. But this is the scenario that now I want to question. If Usman Khan was able to go into that meeting, was invited because he was supposedly a rehabilitated prisoner, can we now say that this Learning Together is really a successful program? And the reason why I'm even bringing this up is because I suggest that those who are, and they mean well. Listen, I don't have anything against Jack Meritt, and we want to, it's terrible that he has to be killed, and he was the first to be killed, and the other woman that was killed, and my heart goes out to his family, and I understand his family have asked that nobody even suggest that they're to change any policies because of his death. They mean well, but I don't think they understand some of the problems that this whole program is bringing up. And here's where I want to really zero in on. This program is built and designed for Western prisoners who do, in many cases, are social misfits, who in many cases do coming from working class backgrounds, who in many cases do have personality problems, and often have learning deficiencies. This has been proven for many prisoners. That is the case. And so you can see why many of them do feel disenfranchised. Many of them do feel like they are social misfits. Many of them do go to drugs and drink and often do get caught up in crime. And so it stands to reason that if you have that kind of prisoner and you want to rehabilitate that kind of prisoner, then of course you would use this kind of program, Learning Together, and in this case, Disengagement and Desistance Program. That would make sense for a Western prisoner in a Western context, showing many of these Western proclivities. We're not dealing with Western prisoner now. These are not Western, and I hope Muslims are getting this. A Muslim, radical Muslim, does not start from the same premise. Usman Khan was not disenfranchised. He was not a loner. Look at these pictures. He belongs to a group. He was caught with 9 others. He was very much part of Al-Mujahideen. He was being coached by Anjem Choudhury, and he was coached on this book here. He was coached on this very book, the Quran. He knew about this book. He actually read this book. He was taught about this book, and I know exactly the verses he was given, because if you can read it, you can see these verses are full. I mean, this book is full of violent verse after violent verse after violent verse, about 150 violent verses in this book. We've done this before. This is not new. You've not heard me just make this up. I've said this many times before. So we're dealing with someone who believes that this book is uncreated, that it has always existed, that is co-eternal with God himself, Allah himself, and therefore it is unfettered with any human intervention, that it is exactly the same book that has always existed for 1400 years. The same book that I have in my hand here, this Arabic Quran, is the same that exists in heaven. And therefore, if you are brought up in that, and he was brought up in that, remember, he was brought up in a very strong Muslim family, and you believe that this is God's holy word and not a man-made document, therefore it must be obeyed and never critiqued. And that's what a Muslim is, someone who obeys, someone who is submissive. Then can you understand when you're dealing with a completely different mindset, a completely different worldview, and you would therefore follow everything you read in this book. So when it says, slay the unbeliever wherever ye find them, besiege them, lay in wait for them with every kind of ambush, in chapter 9, verse 5. However you want to exegete that, I don't care which side of the area, I don't care which side of exegesis you come from, whether you believe it's liberal, or you take a liberal stance on that verse, or you take a conservative stance. You got to remember, the vast majority of Muslims believe that verse. You may come from the most liberal position and say, that has nothing to do with the day. That may be your opinion, but that's not the opinion of almost 91 to 95% of the Muslim population today. When it says in chapter 8, verse 39, slay the unbeliever until there is no more fitna, no more unbelief, and all have faith in Allah. When you read that verse, I don't know how else you can interpret it. When it says in the Quran very clearly that in chapter 47, I said this earlier in the earlier episode, in chapter 47, verse 1 to 3, it defines who a believer is and who unbeliever is. And then by verse 4, it says, cut off the heads of the unbeliever. And then you have verse 5 and 6, which say, and if you participate in jihad, if you participate in striving for Allah, and you should die, great shall be your reward, for you shall be in heaven. How else are you to interpret that verse if you believe this is from God himself, and you're supposed to just submit and obey verses like that? How else are they going to interpret that verse except literalistically? And actually, reading that verse as a Christian, I would have to say that they probably have a better interpretation of the verse than most woolly liberals, or most of the people, pundits, who are now all over the internet trying to say this has nothing to do with Islam. Even these two gentlemen here, I just want to show you their picture. These are two Muslims that were featured there in BBC News to show that they were two Muslims who came down to the bridge this morning there in London time. I'm sorry, this morning, meaning Saturday morning, London. And they were bowing and having prayers, and they said clearly that this has nothing to do with Islam, because Islam is peaceful. And then they quoted from chapter 5, verse 32. For he who takes the blood of one as if he takes the blood of all, but he who saves the blood of one as if he saves the blood of all, supporting therefore their notion that not only is the Quran showing that it's a peaceful religion, but the Quran itself is very clear that we are not to take blood. What the two Muslim men who were saying that did not say, and what was fascinating, these two Muslim men are Ahmadiyya. They are from the Ahmadiyya movement, which is a very peaceful movement within Islam, a cult within Islam, not accepted as true Muslims by any other Muslims, and I'm not going to get into that right now. But what they didn't say is at the beginning of that very verse, it says, O children of Israel, referring there back to verse 31, which has to do with the blood of Abel by Cain. It's the story of Cain and Abel killing his brother, and that's why this is for the children of Israel. He who takes the blood of one, referring to the blood of Abel, is if he takes the blood of all of us Jews. This is only Jews. This is children of Israel. This has nothing to do with Islam. But he who saves the blood of a Jew, children of Israel, is if he saves all of us who are Jews. What these two Muslims should have used is the next verse, verse 33, and that one is very clear. It says, he who stands against Allah and is a prophet, or calls mischief in the land, shall be crucified and have their hands and legs on opposite ends cut off. That's the verse they should have been talking about, but they're not going to do that, not after a killing like this the day before. And of course, they're trying to give a brave face, and that's the only verse they're going to quote. They're not going to quote chapter 8 verse 39. They're not going to quote chapter 9 verse 111. Chapter 9 verse 111 is another verse which fascinating. 9:11. I know you're starting to look at me and say, hold on, my J, are you making it up? No, chapter 9 verse 111 says this: Verily, Allah has purchased of the believers their lives and their properties, for that theirs shall be paradise. So he has purchased your lives, and so that you may have paradise. How? They fight in Allah's cause, so they kill others and are killed. It is a promise in truth, which is binding on him in the Torah, which means, therefore, that if you kill others, and if you are killed, then you will have paradise. Here's another verse that supports chapter 47, verse 5 and 6. 9/11. Fascinating. The irony is not lost on me. I'm sure not on you as well. But can you see what these verses are saying? Can you see what these verses show, and why these two Muslim men are only choosing a verse that really has nothing to do with them? When you look at the Quran, there is verse after verse after verse. When Usman Khan looks at the Quran, he's looking at these verses. When Anjum Chowdhury is training him, he's training him up in these verses. Is it stand to reason then that the narrative that we need to use with these people is different than the narrative we should be using with a Western convict? People who are convicts here in the West do not follow a scripture, do not follow a book that they believe is eternal, and do not have a book that they follow. Not even the Bible comes up with anything like that. Certainly in the New Testament, we don't have anything that comes close to what the Quran has when it comes to violence. And that's why this whole series on violence and peace is relevant for what we're saying. And that's in some ways fascinating that this event should happen right as we're beginning this whole series on violence and peace, and how irrelevant this book is for today. This book is really irrelevant for today, folks. And if you're going to deal with convicts, criminals, who are already shown to be radicalized, as Usman Khan showed back in 2010 and also 2012 when he was convicted and put in prison, if you're going to deal with those kind of convicts, you're going to have to start paying attention to what they're reading. You're going to have to start paying attention to what their ideology is and where they get their ideology from. And I don't care how many letters you can write to the Home Office, as this one here. You can, pretty much what it's telling me, and it scares me to realize that Muslims can say anything they want and can try to retract what they believe. And we believe them, because we're not aware of what really motivates them. We have no idea of what where their ideology comes from, and we have no idea how powerful this book is. This book is enormously powerful. And unless you read this book, unless you read these verses, unless you understand what they're saying, and unless you realize how these are impacting on young men like Usman Khan and Anjum Chowdhury and all the others that he is teaching and training up, because he is bringing them back to that book, and they also bring him back to the model behind that book, the man behind that book. That's Muhammad. And I've said this many, many times: the book of the man, the book of the man. You've heard me do this. You've got to go to the book. You've got to go to the man to know what real Islam is, to what is happening. And if you do not go back to that book and not read those verses and not see how that the narrative that the Muslims, these young men and women, are using, then you're not going to know how to deal with them. You're not going to have any solution for them. And the solution is not simply sending him to these courses called disengagement programs. Now they're going to have up to 230 by June of this next year. It's going to be tripled. They're going to triple the number of people in this program. Why? Because according to BBC, there is a record number of extremists now in prison right across Europe. It's not diminishing, it's growing. To say that these people are nearly... And what does this program teach? Well, it says here, according to what BBC says, that it teaches them mentoring and psychological support, and gives them theological and ideological advice, so that they can have an identity, so they can have self-esteem, meaning and purpose, and personal grievances, and confront the radical narrative. Boy, oh boy, you can see that they still don't understand what they're up against. They still don't understand what motivates these guys. They still have no idea that you cannot de-radicalize a radical Muslim from his own scripture and from his own religion and from his own ideology when he is birthed in it, grew up in it, and will die in it. How can you do that any more than you can de-radicalize me and make me suddenly stop reading this book? And that's why we as Christians understand how idiotic these programs are. But see, they're run by people who are not religious. They're run by people who are secular. They're run by people who do not understand the power of Scripture. I understand the power of Scripture. Any Christian hearing me right now understands the power of Scripture. And we understand how powerful this book is because we have an equally powerful book. But we realize that this book is going to take you to perdition, and this book is going to cause violence after violence. I am not surprised that the prisons are growing with extremists. Not the other way around. De-radicalizing them does not change it. It will de-radicalizing them is a very Western concept for Western prisoners, but it doesn't work with Muslims if this is their authority. If this is their authority, then you're going to have to take down this book. And who in the world is going to do that? Not the prison organizations, not the criminologists, nor even Jack Meritt, bless his heart. Doctorate in criminology, and he still doesn't understand what he's up against. I'm sorry. This is not the time to be criticizing somebody who has just been killed. And I'm sorry for the family. And I don't mean in any way to be injurious in anything I'm saying. But the fact is, for all those criminologists out there and for those people at Cambridge University who think that they are actually succeeding with this group, this organization, I think that they're failing because they look and see what just happened yesterday to realize that they're failing miserably because they are not understanding who they're up against or what they're up against and how, therefore, they need to solve it. They need a new narrative. The narrative has to confront this book. You've got to confront this book. And you've got to confront the man behind this book. I don't know what other way to see it. And that's why I'm spending so much time confronting that very book. That's why all these videos are about confronting the Quran. That's why I'm going to spend the rest of my life confronting the Quran and confronting Muhammad. Because it is that book and the man behind this book that are doing all the damage. These are young, bright, young men. Usman Khan grew up in Britain, had a British educational system, had everything that everybody else in that room that was in that room with him had. But none of them left that room with a knife in their hands. None of them killed two people. He was the one that killed two people. And there will be others like Usman Khan, I'm afraid. Until we get it right, until we understand what we're up against, and until we realize that it is this book that's causing the problem. And Islam, by its very nature, is dependent on that book. Will always be dependent on that book. Folks, come back to this book, please. You've got to find a better antidote. We're the only ones that have the antidote. We're the only ones that have the response. We're the only ones that have the answer. We're the only ones that really understand what the problem is, and we are the only ones that realize you've got to come back to Jesus Christ. You've got to come back to the man of peace. You've got to come back to the book of peace. You've got to come back to the ideology based on both the book and the man of peace. We are the only one that have the antidote. We have the only alternative. And I'm saying this to Muslims who are out there. Come on home. Come on home to Jesus Christ. It's sad, after what happened yesterday, that we have to live yet again through another killing. How many more are we going to have? Well, I don't have anything more to say about it. I think I've said enough. I'm sure I'm going to get an awful lot of responses, and I hope there's going to be a discussion on this. But please, for those of you who are not religious, who do not understand the power of Scripture and do not understand the power of even who God is, if you don't understand that, let those of us who do actually engage in this discussion with Muslims. Let those of us who do actually try to bring them home away from a very violent book to a very peaceful book, from a very violent man to a very peaceful man, from a very violent ideology to a very peaceful ideology. And that is the person of Jesus Christ. What a man for today. What a man for every day. Ooh, I love his book and I love his gospel. And we're going to continue to preach that. This is Jay, them here in my office, back in my office now. Over and out.